1805, an African church formed in Boston under the ministry of Thomas Paul, a colored man. Their house of worship was finished in 1806, the lower story fitted up for a schoolroom. 1806, the Baptist churches in South Carolina were 130. The number of ministers 100 and communicants 10,500, of which perhaps 3,500 were Negroes. 1897, Hanover Presbytery, Virginia, addressed a circular to the churches under their care, solemnly exhorted them not to neglect their duty to their servants. Virginia, Magna Carta, Volume 3, page 159. 1809, the Abyssinian or African Church formed in the city of New York, house of worship in Anthony Street, also an African church in Philadelphia, supplied for a time by Henry Cunningham of Savannah, Georgia. The estimate of colored communicants in the Baptist churches in Virginia this year I set down at 9,000. 1810, by the reports of the state of the Congregation of the Protestant Episcopal Church in South Carolina, made in the convention, there were 199 colored communicants in 3 churches: Ville, St. Philip's and St. Michael's, Charleston 120 and 73, and Prince George's, Wynyard 6. The other reports do not distinguish between white and colored communicants. 1813, there were 40,000 Negroes connected with the Baptist denomination in the states of Pennsylvania, Delaware, Virginia, North Carolina, South Carolina, and Georgia. The historical remarks that among the African Baptists in the southern states, there are a multitude of preachers and exhorters whose names do not appear on the minutes of associations. They preach principally on the plantations to those of their own color, and their preaching, though broken and illiterate, is in many cases highly useful. 1816, there was a report adopted by the General Assembly of the Presbyterian Church in the United States on the question, ought baptism on the promise of the master to be administered to the children of slaves, as follows. Number 1, that it is the duty of masters who are members of the church to present the children of parents in servitude to the ordinance of baptism, provided they are in a situation to train them up in the nurture and admonition of the Lord, thus securing to them the rich advantages which the gospel promises. That it is the duty of Christian ministers to inculcate this doctrine and to baptize all children when presented to them by their masters. Minutes of the Assembly. The subject of missions to the Negroes occupied the attention of the General Assembly, but no plan of missions was carried into effect. Dr. Rice of Virginia was employed by the Committee on Missions in the Assembly for a part of the year, and his labors were encouraging, as already stated by Dr. Alexander in his letter, and as appears also from the minutes of the Assembly, page 372. The Colonization Society was formed this year, and I noticed it as furnishing an index to the feelings of many in relation to the empowerment of the Negro race. The Methodists reported this year 42,304 colored members, and a decrease of 883 since 1815. Dr. Bain says this was owing to a defection among the colored people in the city of Philadelphia, by which upwards of 1,000 in that city withdrew from our church and set up for themselves with Richard Allen, a colored local preacher, an elder in the Methodist Episcopal Church at their head. By habits of industry and economy, though born a slave in one of the southern states, he had not only procured his freedom, but acquired considerable wealth. And since he had exercised the office of a preacher and an elder, obtained great influence over his brethren in the church. After secession, they organized themselves into an independent body under the title of the African Methodist Episcopal Church. At their first general conference in April 1816, Richard Allen was elected bishop. At the conference in 1828, Morris Brown was elected joint superintendent with Allen. And on the death of Allen in 1836, Edward Waters was elected joint superintendent with Brown. The colored congregation of New York City followed to example. They adopted the itinerant mode of preaching and have spread themselves in different parts of Pennsylvania, New York, New Jersey, Maryland, and Delaware. There are also some in the western states and a few in upper Canada. In the more southern states, the Allenites, could make no favorable impression, as their preachers were not recognized by the laws of the states, and the slave population who were members of our church had the character of our white ministry pledged as a guarantee for their good behavior. 1818. On the report of colored members for this year, the same writer remarks, "For while there was an increase of white members amounting to 9,035, there was a decrease of 4,261 of the colored members." He states that this was owing to the Allenite secession, although not all who through its influence declared themselves independent attached themselves to the Allenites. 1819. The increase of colored members this year was but 24. 1819, 39, 174. 1818, 39, 150. Well, I'll say 39,174 and 1818, 39,150. The smallness of the increase accounted for by the secession of the Negroes in New York City, amounting to 14 local preachers and 929 private members, including class leaders, exhorters, and stewards. A report dated June 14, 1819, of a committee of the Board of Managers of the Bible Society of Charleston, South Carolina, respecting the progress and present state of religion in South Carolina, will cast some light on the subject before us. From the first information the committee have been able to obtain, they find that the gospel is now preached to about 613 congregations of Protestant Christians, that there are about 292 ordained clergymen who labor amongst them, besides a considerable number of domestic missionaries devoted and supported by each denomination, who dispense their labors to such of the people as remain destitute of an established ministry. From actual returns and cautious estimates, Where such returns have not been obtained, it appears that in the state there are about 46,000 Protestants who receive the Holy Communion of the Lord's Supper. In the city of Charleston, upwards of 1/4 of the communicants are slaves or free persons of color, and it is supposed that in the other parts of the state, the proportion of such communicants may be estimated at about 1/8. In every church, they are freely admitted to attend on divine service. In most of the churches, distinct accommodations are provided for them, and the clergy in general make it a part of their pastoral care to devote frequent and stated seasons for the religious instruction of catechismen from amongst the black population. It may be proper to state in connection with this report that from the beginning, with scarcely an exception, the Negroes applying for admission into the churches have been under the instruction of white ministers or members, have been examined and approved as candidates for baptism, have been baptized and have partaken of the Lord's Supper at the same time with white candidates and members, and been subject to the same care and discipline, no distinction being made between the two classes of members in respect to the privileges and discipline of the churches. The Episcopal Church reported in part the number of colored members from 1812 to 1818, the majority in Charleston. The highest number reported was in 1817, 328. In 1818, there were 289. 1820, Bishop McKendry presented an address to the General Conference at Baltimore, in which he took notice of the condition of the slaves. The number of colored members by the minutes of conference was 40,558. The census of 1800 gave us 893,041 Negro slaves and 110,555 free, making a total of 1,003,596. That of 1810 was 1,191,364 slaves and 195,643 free. Total Negro population 1,387,007. That of 1820, 1,538,064 slave and 244,020 free. Total 1,782,084. The importation of Africans into our country ceased by law on the 1st of January 1808. The traffic was abolished by Virginia in 1778 and by Pennsylvania, Massachusetts, Connecticut, and Rhode Island in 1780, 1787, 1788. Before the year 1820, measures were taken by all the present free states in which slavery had existed for bringing the system to a close. What special efforts, if any, were made in these states by the churches or by societies for the religious instruction of the Negroes, thus obtaining their freedom, I have no means of asserting with accuracy. From the best information in my possession, special efforts were very few and very limited. As a nation, we were scarcely reviving from the revolution and the excitement of the formation and establishment of our Constitution, when we were involved in a war with France, which with its influences and what was worse, the infidelity and skepticism which our previous connection with that nation introduced among us, most seriously affected the interests of religion, and the decline was perceptible in a greater or less degree over the whole Union. Not long after, our troubles with England began, which resulted in a 4 years' war. Notwithstanding these interruptions, the Spirit of God was poured out largely in different parts of the country. Indeed, the first quarter of the 19th century witnessed a remarkable revival of the missionary spirit in the American as well as English churches. Many societies were organized on a large and liberal scale, in whose existence the world has a reason to rejoice for the spreading of the gospel, both at home and abroad, as well by the circulation of the scriptures and auxiliary publications as by the living teacher. This spirit wrought in the hearts of ministers and people generally, and a new and mighty impulse was given to religion in the South, awakened many to see the spiritual necessities of the Negroes. Many ministers began to preach particularly and more faithfully to them and to attempt a regular division of their time on the Sabbath between the whites and blacks. Attempts were also made in some parts of the South to teach the Negroes letters so as to enable them to read the Word of God for themselves. These schools were short-lived, but the fact of their existence evidences that there was considerable interest felt in their religious instruction. Houses of public worship, exclusively for use of the Negroes, were erected in many of the chief towns, and they worshiped in them under the care of white or colored teachers. In numbers of white churches, space was allowed for the accommodation of the Negroes in the galleries or in the body of the house below, and within sight and hearing of country churches in some pleasant grove fitted up with booths with a stand or pulpit for preaching. The Negroes would oftentimes be seen assembling for worship between services or in the afternoon. There were planters also who undertook to read and explain the scriptures and pray with their people. It is not too much to say that the religious and physical condition of the Negroes were both improved during this period. Their increase was natural and regular, ranging every 10 years between 35 and 36%. As the old stock from Africa died out of the country, the grosser customs, the ignorance and paganism of Africa died with them. Their descendants, the country born, were better looking, more intelligent, more civilized, more susceptible of religious impressions. Growing up under the eyes and in the families of owners, they became more attached to them, were identified in their households, and accompanied them to church. The gospel was preached to masters and servants. Servants having no religion to renounce grew up in the belief of that of their masters. On the whole, however, but a minority of the Negroes, in that a small one, attended regularly the house of God, and taking them as a class, their religious instruction was extensively and most seriously neglected. Chapter 3, the third period, from 1820 to 1842, a period of 22 years. 1821, the Methodist Episcopal Church reported this year 42,059 colored members in the United States, and their numbers gradually increasing. 1822, the account of the labors of the Moravian Brethren by Mr. Smith's already preferred to brings down their labors to 1837 and is as follows. In January 1822, a female auxiliary to the Missionary Society was formed at Salem and at their special request, an attempt was made to collect the Negroes into a separate confederation of their own, a plan which had, indeed, long been an object of desire. Brother Abraham Steiner was commissioned to make a commencement of the work by holding a monthly preaching on a plantation about 3 miles distant from Salem, where the Negro communicants resided. At his first sermon there, March 24th, 1822, more than 50 black and colored people were present. After a fervent prayer, he discoursed on the words of our Savior, the Son of Man is come to seek and to save that which was lost. With this monthly preaching, which was well attended by the Negroes, cast technical instruction in the great truths of our religion was combined. May 19th, the Lord's Supper was celebrated with the 3 persons who were already communicants as the first fruits of this infant Negro flock. Great stillness and devotion continued to mark the attendance of the Negroes on divine worship, yet few sought for closer fellowship, so that this little flock has never to the present day numbered more than 20 members. A Negro chapel was built in 1823 at the expense of the female auxiliary and consecrated by Brother Bernard, the resident bishop, December 28, in the presence of near 100 Negroes and colored people and many members of the congregation at Salem. This was followed by the baptism of a married Negro woman, and the solemnities of the day were closed by a cheerful love feast, at which the object of our covenant was explained and 2 Negroes were received into the congregation. It was a day of blessing for the Negroes, many of whom seemed to be deeply affected. Having now a place of worship of their own, the meetings could be better adapted to their circumstances. Several sisters offered themselves to keep a Sunday school for their benefit, and it was diligently frequented not only by children but also by adults. This hopeful project was soon, however, painfully interrupted by the law which passed the legislature of North Carolina, forbidding any school instruction to be imparted to the Negroes, a prohibition which likewise operated very injuriously on their attendance at the meetings. May 22nd, 1833, the Negroes were called to mourn over the loss of their faithful and much-loved pastor, Brother Abraham Steiner, and his place was supplied by Brother John Renatus Smith. For the last year of two, they have manifested a great desire for the word of life and visited the house of God more diligently. And our testimony to the sufferings and death of Jesus appears to find more interest into their hearts in the private meetings of the little Negro flock, and particularly at the Holy Communion. The peace of the Most High, the peace of God, is powerfully perceptible. The company of emancipated Negroes, upwards of 20 in number, who sailed last year from Liberia on the western coast of Africa, had all been diligent attendants on our meetings and former Sunday school, and one of them was a communicant member of our flock. At parting, they declared with tears that nothing grieved them so much as the loss of these privileges. They promised to devote themselves to the Lord Jesus and to remain faithful to Him. In the 14 years which have elapsed since their church was dedicated, 10 adults and 73 children have been baptized and 8 received into the congregation. The little flock consists at present 1837 of 17 adult members, 10 of whom are communicants. On the settling of the Brethren in Wachovia, North Carolina, it was their most cherished object to communicate the gospel both to the Indians on the borders of the southern states and to the Negro population of those states, amounting to several thousands, especially to such as resided in the neighborhood of our congregations, hoping that they might be favored to gather from among them a reward for the travail of the redeemed soul. Special meetings were accordingly commenced at Hope and Bethany and elsewhere in the neighborhood of Salem, and Negroes who were numerous in these districts were in general diligent in attending them. The various ministers stationed at Salem, the late Brethren Fitz, Klaus, Krumsch, Wolfarst, Abraham, Steiner, and their wives interested themselves with particular affection for the spiritual welfare of the Negroes in their vicinity, and the Lord so blessed their labors to the hearts of many that they could be admitted to a participation of the Lord's Supper. A thankful remembrance of their faithful services is still retained by the Negroes. Still retained by the Negroes. In the prosecution of the mission amongst the Cherokees, and in the attempt to establish one amongst the Creek Indians, the Negroes dispersed among them were not forgotten. Our brethren at Spring Place had the gratification of baptizing the firstling of these Negroes July 29th, 1827. He was a native African of the Thaahwam tribe and was baptized into the death of Jesus by the name of Christian Jacob, continuing faithful to his Christian profession till his happy end. The Reverend John Mines, pastor of a church in Leesburg, Virginia, published the Evangelical Catechism, or a plain and easy system of the principal doctrines and duties of the Christian religion, adapted to the use of Sabbath schools and families, with a new method of instructing those who could not read. Richmond, 1822. His new method was his new method was what is called oral instruction. The scholars repeating the answers after the teacher until committed to memory. Mr. Mines was much interested in the religious instruction of the Negroes. In the preface of his catechism, he states that he had several classes of them taught by his friends. He commends the use of it to masters and mistresses as a humble attempt to furnish them with appropriate means for the instruction of their servants in religious knowledge, and he commends it also to his colored friends in the United States as a book written especially for them, and says, with the help of God, I will attend particularly to your spiritual interests while I live. 1823, Bishop Dehon of the Diocese of South Carolina had all his good feelings excited in behalf of the Negroes. In his own congregation, he was the laborious and patient minister of the African, and he encouraged among the masters and mistresses in his flock that best kindness towards their servants, concern for their eternal salvation. He endeavored to enlighten the community on this subject. He would gladly embrace opportunities to converse with men of influence relating to it, etc. Life by Dr. Gaston, the Reverend Dr. Thaahwam of the Episcopal Church, Charleston, this year issued a valuable pamphlet entitled Practical Considerations Founded on the Scriptures relative to the slave population of South Carolina. Its design is given in the first paragraph, namely to show from the scriptures of the Old and New Testaments that slavery is not forbidden by the divine law, and at the same time to prove the necessity of giving religious instruction to our Negroes. Dr. Thaahwam mentions that in 1822 there were 316 colored communicants in the Episcopal churches in Charleston and 200 children in their colored Sunday schools. A few months before this pamphlet appeared, Dr. Richard Furman, president of the Baptist State Convention of South Carolina, in the name of that convention, addressed a letter to His Excellency Governor Wilson, giving an exposition of the views of the Baptists relative to the colored population in the United States, in which, among other observations, we find the following. Their religious interests claim a regard from their masters of the most serious nature, and it is indispensable. The lamented Dr. John Hope Rice, already mentioned in this sketch, presented the subject of the religious instruction of the Negroes in a strong light to the consideration of his fellow citizens of Virginia in the Evangelical magazine, volume 8, page 613 to 614. He printed a sermon on the duty of masters to educate and baptize the children of their servants. Through this influence, many in Virginia were induced to give the duty of the religious instruction of the Negroes serious consideration, which resulted in action. One of his objects in devoting himself to the establishment of Prince Edward Theological Seminary was that a ministry might be educated at home and fitted for the field, composed as it is of masters and servants, bond and free. This was also one prominent object in the minds of many ministers, elders, and laymen in the foundation of endowment of the theological seminary of the Synod of South Carolina and Georgia in Columbia, South Carolina. 1828. Number of colored members in Methodist E Church, 48,096, and for 1825, 49,537. 1826, 51,334,000. 1827, 53,565. 1828, 58,856, showing a steady increase. In 1828, a plain and easy catechism designed chiefly for the benefit of colored persons with suitable prayers and hymns annexed was published by Reverend B. M. Palmer, D.D., pastor of the Circular Church, Charleston, South Carolina. 6 or 8 years before this, he had published a smaller work of the same kind and bearing nearly the same title. During all his ministry in Charleston, he was a firm supporter of the religious instruction of the Negroes, both in word and deed. 1829, the Honorable Charles Coatsworth Pixley of the Episcopal Church delivered an address before the Agricultural Society of South Carolina, in which he ably and largely insists upon the religious instruction of the Negroes. This address went through 2 or more editions and was extensively circulated and with the happiest effects. 1830. The historian of the Methodist Episcopal Church remarks, this year several missions were commenced for the specific benefit of the slave population in the states of the South, particularly South Carolina and Georgia. This class of people had become favored with the labors of the Methodist ministry from the beginning of its labors in this country, and there were at this time 62,814 of the colored population in the several states and territories in our church fellowship, most of whom were slaves. It was found, however, on a closer inspection into their condition, that there were many that could not be reached by the ordinary means, and therefore preachers were selected who might devote themselves exclusively to their service. He allures particularly to the Missionary Society of the South Carolina Conference, auxiliary to the Missionary Society of the Methodist Episcopal Church, of which, at least so far as its efforts respect the Negro population, the Reverend William Capers, D.D., of Charleston, South Carolina, is the founder. He has been superintendent of these missions to the Negroes from their commencement and has spared no exertions to extend and render them successful. The reports of the Board of Managers, drawn up from year to year by himself, exhibit the purity and fervor of his zeal in so good a cause, as well as the remarkable progress which it has made. Just a moment.